Happy Year again. Just passing the talking stick over to you. Thinking outside the box, why and how? What do you have to share with the beautiful people?
Well, yeah, it's a really, I think, an important discussion for now because we're seeing a lot of divisiveness. There's lots of talk, on Facebook about identity, and I think we're all trying to claim some type of identity on some level. And from a personal example, my move from D.C. to South Carolina, in making that transition, having relationships and having work situations and having my spirituality tested really brought me to the edges of my box. So as my identity began to shift and change, I got to see myself in the process of expanding my own template. Ram Dass says, we go from one level of illusion to another. So it's like we just keep breaking the box a little bit further open. And if anyone's seen my picture, you'll see that I'm a walking out-of-the-box statement. When you tattoo your face with sacred symbols and you decide to live amongst the people who are more conditioned to overculture thinking, you tend to be a challenge to that box that they may be in. And I think there are safe ways to engage those edges together without imposing our boxes on each other. I worked for people for the ethical treatment of animals for a very long time. So my job was to go out and talk about veganism and animal rights and to challenge that idea that animals they're not sentient beings, they don't suffer. But what I found is it wasn't necessarily through the aggressive tactics, but through actual dialogue, when I actually got to talk to people about not necessarily our differences, but our similarities. We got to not necessarily shatter our boxes, but we got to have respect for each other's paths. Because I think the word box really is constraining. When we talk about spirituality and our life journey, it's more of a path that we're on. And the path itself can be a box. Like yoga is a really good example. You'll have people who only do hatha, they only do ashtanga, they only do kundalini, and that's their religion. And they will not deviate from their posture sequences. They don't like to mess with the tradition. And then there's people like me who have spiritual ADD, who were, I feel, put on this earth to challenge all of those constraints. And I think it's important to have those that hold tradition, but also those of us who walk so far off the path that we, challenge the notion that it has to be done one way. So I think gentle conversations with one another, and the word mindfulness came up in the chat room quite a bit. And I think getting into a place where we're finding presence in our own experience and seeing where our edges are and then challenging our own edges. I always tell my students that the toughest thing and the hardest thing with spirituality or any practice that's disciplined is showing up. But once you start showing up, it's sometimes the fear. It isn't the discipline that scares us. It isn't the practice that scares us. It's the fact that once we show up, everything has to change. And when we start challenging the edges of our own experience, we begin to evolve. And we have to be careful not to get caught in overculture's distraction. It's like if I have my yoga mat out and I'm going to do a yoga practice, I should probably get away from the Facebook and not, let myself get trapped into watching cute puppy videos. So having a little bit of discipline with where we're challenging ourselves helps us to break free of our edges. Because I think a lot of times we spend too much time worrying about other people's boxes. First look at your box and then allow yourself to be more connected to your own experience. And then you can dialogue with others about the shared experience, and not necessarily through a place of challenge, but through a place of objectivity. And it's like, let's take a look at what we both have going on here. And we become teachers versus warring parties.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great. And I there's a couple things that came to mind. I think you bring up a good point. Like the box is not the enemy, and in a very real way, the box can be an ally. And you're right. Like maybe not even using the word box is the best thing to use. I mean, even when you were talking about identity, for me, something that came to mind. I mean, oftentimes people will think about that. They'll think how does their identity fit within a box. But then it's this idea that instead of that box being something that is handed to you, which is so common the case with overculture is a term that you use. Somebody, they give you a box and they say, this is your identity, this is your job, this is who you will be, these are your duties, this is what you will become. Whereas I think when you can understand that that box is being given to you in the first place, that this box is nothing more than an opportunity, then you can sort of step outside of it and almost play with it in the same way you would be sculpting, working with clay. So, again, it's not actually just saying this box is just this one shape. This box is like a metaphor for a complex geometric shape that is who you can choose to make it into, sort of thing. So, step outside your own box, observe your box, and then create your box. Create it into something that is magical. Create it into, say, like, who am I? Who do I choose to be? Who is my identity? And I think you're right. Personal identity is a very, very interesting thing that comes up. And obviously people will sort of get into this conversation of ego, and that in itself, people will say how, like, ego isn't necessarily the enemy. Like, ego is a part of the structure of the box. It is a part of, like, a layer of paint within the structure that sort of gives it a little bit more characteristic, but maybe there's a better way to describe that. That was just a few things that came to mind, and even something just in terms of thinking outside the box. A recent way of explaining things that came to me, and I talked about this in a recent video dream log that I posted, and those of you who are interested who haven't seen that, of course, just check out my YouTube to find out that. But it was this idea how taking this outside the box, like, we are not just who we are right now. Who we are right now is only a fraction of who we really are. And who we really are is like the character playing the video game. And who we are right now, who we think we are, is just